37. Let that sink in. There have been more nationwide injunctions in the past 2 months against President Trump than in the entire 20th century. There have been more nationwide injunctions against President Trump in the last 2 months than both terms of George W. Bush, both terms of Barack Obama, and Joe Biden's term. We saw during the Biden presidency lawfare, indicting President Trump 4 times, using the machinery of justice to attack him, and that was an attack on democracy, because Democrats today hate democracy. Democrats today are angry at the voters for re-electing Donald Trump and electing a Republican Senate and a Republican House, and they engaged in lawfare to stop democracy from operating. Understand, this is the second phase of lawfare. Second chart. This is the second phase of lawfare. Now that their efforts to indict President Trump and stop the voters from re-electing him have failed, they're going and seeking out individual radical judges to try to shut down policies, and they are forum shopping like crazy. Give me any loon judge put on the bench by Obama or Biden who disagrees with a policy. We just saw a judge flagrantly ignore U.S. immigration law concerning TPS being revoked. U.S. law explicitly said there's no judicial review for that, but hey, they found a judge who says, you know what? We, the Democrat Party, we are the party of illegal aliens. We are the party of murderers and rapists and gang members, and the Democrat Party exists here to fight to keep murderers and rapists and gang members in your communities. There's a reason the Democrat Party is at 26% approval nationwide, because they put radical policies ahead of rule of law.
We just watched that clip, and I want to say before we get into everything, Ted Cruz came ready today. Actually ready. While other senators were giving speeches and dodging questions, Cruz walked in with data, with receipts, and with the kind of energy most politicians only bring during election season. This video covers multiple hearings and multiple committees, and Cruz is showing up in all of them. We are going to watch the full video together, and I will break down every moment that matters. If you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button, because we cover Senate proceedings, confirmation hearings, and political moments the mainstream media buries or spins. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of that opening clip. Let's get into it.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you again, Mr. Roth. Along with the $42.5 billion that Congress provided for the broadband program known as BEAD, we also provided nearly $3 billion to help ensure all Americans have the skills and the knowledge to participate in the online world. Those funds are critical to ensure that all Americans can benefit from the digital revolution. In Massachusetts, for example, residents expressed difficulties finding jobs online and obtaining other important services. This funding will help close those gaps. Ms. Roth, if confirmed, will you commit to fulfilling NTIA's legal obligation to provide the money authorized and appropriated by Congress for this program?
Senator, I will always abide by the law. And also, thank you so much for meeting with me in your office. It was such an honor to meet with someone who has had such an influence on my career with so many pieces of legislation that you authored in the telecom sector. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm glad to help to provide employment for you and so many others at the Federal Communications Commission over the years. And thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that. Many of my colleagues have raised the Trump administration's ongoing review of the BEAD program and the impact of any potential changes of the program. Massachusetts has been allocated $147 million in BEAD funding and began accepting applications from providers in January. Just yesterday, Arkansas announced results from their second round of their application process. Other states are in a similar position. Given the Commerce Department's review, should states just stop accepting applications and indefinitely pause their program and just save the money?
Thank you, Senator. As I'm haven't been confirmed yet, I haven't had a chance to confer with NTIA's career staff, and I haven't been involved in the review process. I would hope that any review conducted by NTIA is expeditious with the goal of expediting build-out.
Yeah, well, will you commit to a quick timeline for when the review will be complete?
As I haven't been confirmed, I'm not in a position to commit to a specific timeline, but I will commit that my goal would be a very expeditious timeline.
Okay, that's great, because I am very worried that changes to the program will cause serious delays in deploying broadband right as states are ready to get shovels in the ground. So now I'd like to talk about a specific change that the Trump administration appears to be pushing for BEAD, turning the program into a subsidy for Elon Musk's Starlink. Under the guise of making the program, quote, technology neutral, the Trump administration may eliminate the program's preference for fiber and make satellite providers like Starlink eligible for BEAD funding in all circumstances. Ms. Roth, do you support that change?
Senator, as I've said before, I would administer the law consistent with the statute and to the benefit of the American people, not for any specific individual or company. I do believe that Congress wrote the law in a technology-neutral manner, and that means an all-of-the-above solution that recognizes different realities across different parts of the country.
But let's be clear. Let's be clear. The BEAD program never excluded satellite broadband, but it did limit it. It did limit it to areas where fiber was excessively expensive. That is in the law. And that's because while satellite broadband may be cheaper to deploy in some locations in the short term, it costs far more to service and maintain in the long run. So, Ms. Roth, do you agree that fiber is a cheaper technology in the long run?
Senator, I would want to confer with NTIA's career staff before assessing a specific product or technology. And I look forward to working with you to ensure that Massachusetts gets the what it needs.
It's not just Massachusetts, it's the whole country.
Absolutely.
Because this satellite versus fiber question is very central. And according to a Bloomberg article yesterday, for example, one state official found that fiber would save households $15,600 over a 30-year period. And I asked that article be included in the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
So, Mr. Roth, I strongly urge you to oppose this giveaway to Elon Musk and ensure that the BEAD program delivers for all Americans and that we not adopt a more costly approach because that surely will drain the funding that could have been used more efficiently. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the senator from Massachusetts, and I would note that in 4 years, the Biden administration managed to connect 0 households with the $42 billion that Congress gave them. And one of the reasons was the Biden administration, I think, engaged in petulant and partisan politics by blacklisting Elon Musk and Starlink, which is technology that could have connected particularly households in distant rural places. And I think it was purely partisan. And I would note we saw this underscored just last week when 2 American astronauts finally came back from the International Space Station, when SpaceX flew them back, and Elon offered months ago to fly them back. And because the Biden administration suffered from Elon derangement syndrome, they stranded our astronauts in space for many months rather than accept the only ride back that could bring them from the station.
If the senator would yield?
Sure,
I
sure.
thank you. So, to the extent to which the Biden administration did authorize last July to contract with SpaceX in order to complete that mission, I think we should note that it began in the Biden administration. And to the extent to which, if we do move forward now with deployment of the BEAD program, all I'm asking is, if that be the case, that we just do it in the most efficient way. That's something that Elon would want.
Yeah. On that, we are agreed.
And if it's clear that it's fiber and not Starlink, that be the approach which is taken by the administration. Because if we do it that way, will save more money for the consumers over time. Looking forward. Let's look forward. Let's look to the future and our opportunities.
You know I'm a
solve the
pushover when you do
problems
your
of
JFK impression.
today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Roth. Appreciate the time you spent carved out for us in the office.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Cruz.
It's long been said that hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. I have to admit I'm enjoying listening to my Democrat colleagues suddenly discover the virtues of the rule of law after 4 years where they brazenly supported the most lawless Department of Justice and the most politically weaponized Department of Justice our nation has ever seen. We just heard the senator from Rhode Island talk about the imperative of protecting judges. And yet not a single Democrat senator cared about the violent protesters that showed up outside Supreme Court justices' homes, including, I might note, female justices like Justice Amy Coney Barrett, threatening their family, and Joe Biden's attorney general didn't do a damn thing and refused to enforce the law to protect those judges. Why? Because he agreed with the violent protesters and he wanted to intimidate and threaten those judges. Professor Bray, under our Constitution, who should decide elections, the voters or unelected judges?
The voters are the ones who should vote in the election according to the laws, and the laws sometimes have to be applied by the judges if there are cases.
And under our Constitution, who is charged with making policy decisions, elected representatives elected by the people or unelected federal judges?
I think the question of policy, Senator, is a little broader than the particular case. So the laws should be enacted by Congress. That's where the fountain of law.
Policy decisions are the elected branches.
Right.
Law is the province of the court. Policy is the province of the elected branches. These are not complicated. Professor Bray, let me ask you this. Do the federal courts have power to issue remedies for people who are not parties to a case?
That's a question I agree is not complicated. They do not have that power.
Is the phrase nationwide injunction or universal injunction found anywhere in the Constitution?
It is not.
First chart. In the first 150 years of our republic, how many nationwide injunctions were issued?
My view is that there were not any until 1963.
0. Now fast forward. How many nationwide injunctions were issued in the entire 20th century?
It's a small number. I would think it would be a dozen, give or take. It's not large.
27, actually. Excluding Trump's first term, how many nationwide injunctions were issued in the last 20 years?
Far more than that.
32. From 2001 to 2024 against Biden, Obama, and Bush, 32. And how many nationwide injunctions have been issued in the last 2 months alone?
There have been quite a few.
37. Let that sink in. There have been more nationwide injunctions in the past 2 months against President Trump than in the entire 20th century. There have been more nationwide injunctions against President Trump in the last 2 months than both terms of George W. Bush, both terms of Barack Obama, and Joe Biden's term. We saw during the Biden presidency lawfare, indicting President Trump 4 times, using the machinery of justice to attack him, and that was an attack on democracy, because Democrats today hate democracy. Democrats today are angry at the voters for re-electing Donald Trump and electing a Republican Senate and a Republican House, and they engaged in lawfare to stop democracy from operating. Understand, this is the second phase of lawfare, second chart. This is the second phase of lawfare. Now that their efforts to indict President Trump and stop the voters from re-electing him have failed, they're going and seeking out individual radical judges to try to shut down policies, and they are forum shopping like crazy. Give me any loon judge put on the bench by Obama or Biden who disagrees with a policy. We just saw a judge flagrantly ignore U.S. immigration law concerning TPS being revoked. U.S. law explicitly said there's no judicial review for that, but hey, they found a judge who says, you know what? We, the Democrat Party, we are the party of illegal aliens. We are the party of murderers and rapists and gang members, and the Democrat Party exists here to fight to keep murderers and rapists and gang members in your communities. There's a reason the Democrat Party is at 26% approval nationwide, because they put radical policies ahead of rule of law. Nationwide injunctions are an abuse of power. It is the judiciary acting as policy deciders, and it is incumbent on this committee and this body to rein in the abuse of power from these unelected radical judges who are trying to overturn the election because they disagree with what the voters decided.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Klobuchar.
Okay, that was a lot. Let me start with a few things. Number one, we love the democracy, and I believe what we should be having is a civil debate about how we can best, if Donald Trump wants to make changes to the government, we should be doing it in a legal way, not how he's doing it. And the only reason there's all these injunctions, Senator Cruz, is because he's violating the Constitution. Why would Trump-appointed judges...
Why don't you file them in red districts?
Senator Cruz.
Why? What did you just say?
Why don't you file them in red districts?
Point
Why
of
are the
order.
Democrat attorneys
Senator Cruz.
general seeking out
Senator Cruz.
left-wing
My
blue
esteemed
single
colleague.
districts?
Patient with
One
Senator
second.
Cruz's activities
Yeah.
in this building.
Senator
I think
Whitehouse.
He's entitled to.
I'm just going to ask for a point of order. Madam Klobuchar, Senator Klobuchar.
Senator Moody, we have debates on this committee. They occur regularly.
Let's let her have her time, and then we'll get back to that. If you
it
want to
is-
wait, we'll get back to you, Senator
She's
Cruz.
welcome to
Senator
answer the
Klobuchar,
question or
go
not.
ahead.
It's her choice.
Go ahead.
I'm so
and I would
excited
encourage
to
you
be
to answer.
following Senator Cruz once again.
Excuse me?
But I will say
Excuse
this.
me? I didn't hear you. What did you say?
To be following him. He and I have a long
I was permitting you your time to continue. To be following him in order. Excuse me. Go ahead, Senator Klobuchar.
During hearing.
Go ahead,
That's
Senator
what I'm
Klobuchar.
referring to.
Go ahead.
And I will take more than my time, since he's taken more than his time to yell at me.
Go
So
ahead.
what I
I've
will
marked the
say
time.
is that
I'm not yelling. I asked a question.
Senator Cruz, please. I'll give you time. Senator Klobuchar, I've got the time, and you'll be allotted
I
time.
am making the strong case that the reason all these cases have been filed, and the reason that these judges who have been appointed by Ronald Reagan, yes, they still exist, and the Bushes and Donald Trump, judges appointed by Donald Trump, have been making these decisions is because this is not legal. Donald Trump himself has used his social media account, the White House account, to post an image of himself wearing a crown saying, "Long live the king." The issue is that we do not live in a kingdom, and Elon Musk is not his court jester. Ours is a nation of laws in which no one is above the law. That is why 39 different judges from vastly different backgrounds, appointed by 5 different presidents, have made clear that these are illegal actions. And these judges have rightly blocked these actions. And it is important that we not lose sight of the underlying cause of these injunctions. It is not that these judges are crooked or lunatics or evil. Those are words used by the president and his allies. It is because the administration is violating the Constitution. What happens when they use these kinds of words? You see more and more threats against judges. And that is what we're seeing. That is why federal judges and the U.S. Marshals, who are responsible for protecting them, are sounding the alarm about a spike in threats against judges. This is serious. And unlike what Senator Cruz said, I'm remembering when the threat was made, the horrific threats, and the man was in Justice Kavanaugh's, on his neighborhood, on his street. On a bipartisan basis, we came together and got more funding for the judges and changed things so that they had more protection. So what he said was completely untrue in terms of Democrats and Republicans decrying violence. We didn't just decry the violence, we actually did something about it in response to a court that is run by Justice Roberts, who is a Republican appointee. So I think that kind of language actually makes the situation worse when it's not even true. But unfortunately, Senator Cruz left, so he did not hear my response to what was a lie. President Trump's attacks on these judges has made for some major risks for these judges. I would ask you, Mr. Panuccio, and not in a partisan way, just normal, as a partner in a law firm, have you ever taken to social media to personally attack a judge who ruled against you? That's all my question is.
Senator, thanks for the question. I think that attacking judges personally and not their reasoning, well, let me just give you a quote. I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind and you will pay the price.
I've asked
you. Want to know, you won't know what hit you if you go forward with those awful decisions. That was something that Senator Schumer said, and I thought it was awful, and it unleashed a wave of violent threats against Supreme Court justices. I do think that's problematic, that kind of language.
I have no doubt the language is a problem on the left or right. I was just asking you if you have ever personally attacked a judge after you disagreed with the ruling. I'm asking you
I have
if
not.
You did it. Thank you. And you believe that the proper recourse is to appeal when you disagree with the ruling?
When I disagree with a ruling on behalf of a client, I appeal.
Thank you. That was all I wanted. I was not going to criticize you. I believed that you would not have done this. And so that is my point. When people do this, and right now we have not just a random person on social media doing it, we have the President of the United States doing it. And I would just ask you, Professor Vladeck, in your opinion, are the judges who ruled against the president radical and rogue judges?
No, and just if I might, even though he has also left the room, Senator Schmidt suggested it was statistically impossible that Chief Judge Boasberg has been assigned to multiple cases in the D.C. District Court. I think that rhetoric is highly inflammatory, in addition to being just mathematically incorrect. There are 31 different cases in the D.C. District Court alone in which D.C. district judges have ruled against the administration. There are 11 or 12 active district judges. The notion that one of those judges would have multiple of those cases is not statistically impossible, it's statistically certain.
And if the president does not want to have judge rule against him, isn't the answer that he just follows the law?
One would think, but I think we live in a bit of an upside-down world at the moment.
Okay, so this hearing was titled in a very academic fashion, Universal Injunctions. And we can make it all academic if we want. Clearly we haven't with Senator Cruz's remarks. But I just want to make the point that this has a real consequence, that these cases that are coming before these judges. This is outside of their decision, which is based on the law and the facts. Sometimes they've ruled with the president, sometimes they've ruled against the president. But just to get it so people understand this isn't just some academic exercise about injunctions and if they're a good thing to have legally. Last month, a federal judge blocked the administration's plan to slash NIH funding for medical research. Could you talk about the impact if the judge had not been able to issue a nationwide injunction?
Sure. So Senator, briefly, because I know our time is limited, NIH hands out thousands and thousands and thousands of grants. If you required the recipients of each grant to litigate the rescission of each of those grants on a retail basis, you would have gaps in cancer research. You'd have gaps in all kinds of work by the National Institutes of Health, because it's not possible that those thousands of the mass action by the government could be challenged on a retail basis in federal courts.
Thank you so much. And
could I get a second round
Senator
of questions?
I allowed you to go way over your time in order to make up, and I wrote it down.
Make two brief observations. Number one, it is interesting as our Democrat colleagues defend these nationwide injunctions that neither of them made any reference to the fact that the number of nationwide injunctions issued in the first 4 months is greater than the entire 20th century and is greater than all of the nationwide injunctions issued against Bush, Obama, and Biden combined, nor did they address the disturbing fact that of the 40 universal injunctions that have been issued in the last 4 months, 35 of them came from the same 5 judicial districts. There is a reason for this. Blue state attorneys general and radical leftist groups are seeking out affirmatively radical judges who they know will impose their own policy preferences. If it were simply, as our Democrat colleagues said, judges following the law, then you wouldn't have to keep going to the same radical judges over and over and over again, because judges across the board should do that. But the litigants know exactly who the zealots are that are on the bench, and that's who they are seeking out. I will also point out that the discussion about the urgency of protecting the safety of judges, listen, I agree. We should protect the safety of every federal judge, but it is interesting because my Democrat colleagues were utterly silent during 4 years of the Biden administration when you had violent mobs outside the homes of Supreme Court justices unhappy with the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs, and the Biden Justice Department refused to enforce federal law and protect the justices. And my Democrat colleagues were perfectly happy with Supreme Court justices being threatened if they disliked the rulings that were coming from the Supreme Court justices. Unlike my colleagues, I believe we should protect judges regardless of whether I agree with them or not. We should protect their safety. And every time you hear a Democrat senator talk about protecting judges from acts of violence, you ought to ask them, why did they not have a word to say about the Biden Justice Department allowing mobs to threaten the families and children of Supreme Court justices night after night after night, while Biden's Attorney General refused to follow the law? And with that, I'll recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. They asked Winston Churchill after World War II.
Would you indulge me for a moment?
We indulge you every moment.
I appreciate that act of generosity. It's just something you said that I think is actually dangerous and should be addressed, and you're welcome. But when Judge Anderol was killed in New Jersey, the Republican colleagues in the Senate, their outpouring of support, their outpouring of concern, they're willing to work together on a bipartisan bill was extraordinary. It shows the truth of this institution that, despite some of the fiery rhetoric that you were sowing, we're really a bipartisan, working bipartisanship. Cornyn and Coons, after the incidents you're talking about, got together and actually passed a bill to better protect our Supreme Court justices, many of whom are friends of ours. You know, Gorsuch and I disagree on a lot of stuff. I knew his wife before he did. We studied together at Oxford. This implication that there was silence when there were threats on their people's houses is absolutely absurd. I remember the rhetoric and the comments, the concern from Coons. I actually distinctly remember you, Chairman, on more than once condemning those attacks on Republican-appointed jurists. To say things like that feeds just the partisanship in this institution and feeds the fiery rhetoric. And it's just plain not true. It's just plain not true. And I think you know that, but we can pull from the record from my colleagues in real time, literally days afterwards, condemning it. There's a lot of substantive things to say here, but to think that the lack of humanity when people's homes are being threatened was not in existence, I think that's unfair and really concerns me that you would say that in the way that you did.
Well, I thank my colleague from New Jersey. I will note, as John Adams observed, that facts are stubborn things. And it is existing federal law, 18 U.S.C. Section 1507, that makes it a crime to protest at a judge's home. And the law provides whoever with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent or of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of his duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States, in or near a building or residence occupied or used by such judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent uses any sound truck or similar device, or resorts to any other demonstration in or near any such building or residence, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year, or both. That is federal criminal law. Night after night after night, angry mobs were outside the Supreme Court justices' homes, and in the entire course of it, the Biden Justice Department prosecuted nobody. We had the Attorney General sitting at that table, and multiple Republican senators asked him, why are you not enforcing the law? What they are doing is a crime. And my friend from New Jersey said, it is a lie to say we, the Democrats, condone this. I would challenge, my friend, find a single Democrat senator on this committee holding the Attorney General to account for not enforcing this law. I was here at those hearings, and I do not recall a single Democrat senator saying to the Attorney General, you should arrest these people who are violating the law, you should protect the judges. I agree that there was general language against violence, but not a single Democrat senator that I ever saw in this committee was willing to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland to account for flagrantly disregarding the federal criminal law because the Biden administration agreed with the protesters and I think wanted those justices harassed at their home.
I really appreciate that you've now shifted the accusation you made earlier. Your accusation was that we were silent in the face of protests at Supreme Court justices' homes. Again, we joined together in a bipartisan way, not only to condemn that, but to pass legislation to extend round-the-clock security protection, literally days. It was introduced May 5th, passed the Senate in a bipartisan fashion on May 9th. So if you're saying that we didn't criticize
Did the
Merrick
Biden
Garland,
DOJ arrest a single person under this law?
You are now changing the
No, that is what I
accusation
said.
that
That is what I said.
Again, I'll pull the record.
Did the Biden DOJ arrest even one?
Again,
The answer is no.
my point to you is the accusation that the Democrats on this committee do not care about the safety
All right, so let me
of
ask you
federal
this.
judges.
Should
I
the
did not
Biden
interrupt you,
DOJ
sir. I would appreciate if you let me finish. I am sick and tired of hearing the kind of heated partisan rhetoric, which is one of the reasons why we have such divisions in this country. The attacks we see from the President of the United States of America trolling and dragging judges through is what we should be talking about that puts people in danger. I'm simply taking issue with the claim that you made at the top that people on the Democratic side of the aisle do not care about the safety and the security of judges and said nothing. You said we were silent after people's houses were protested. That is a patent lie, sir. We were not silent. We took action. We've joined in a bipartisan way to protect those judges, as was done in a bipartisan way to protect a New Jersey judge after their horrific attack at their home. So I see you now trying to shift the debate to whether we talk to an attorney general. I'm simply taking issue with this accusation that somehow we Democrats are so bad because we don't call out threats to our judicial colleagues. And that is wrong. You could change the argument now that you want, but what you said was patently not true and was, in fact, a patent lie.
So I do enjoy the fact that my colleague from New Jersey raises his voice and says it's a patent lie and says he's doing so in defense of lowering the rhetoric. There is some irony to doing those two together. I'll point out that in the entire course of those remarks, Senator Booker did not dispute the central point I made, which is the Biden Justice Department arrested 0 people, prosecuted 0 people for violating the criminal law, and every Democrat senator on this committee was silent about it. And this was an ongoing pattern for months. And I would note also that the senator from New Jersey clutched his pearls about language threatening judges, and yet I do not recall a single Democrat senator of this committee saying a word when Chuck Schumer went to the steps of the Supreme Court and threatened the safety of the Supreme Court justices by name, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and he said, you have unleashed the whirlwind and you will pay the price. And not a single Democrat senator had a word to say about this. And so their outrage is selective. And I will give my colleague from New Jersey a chance to just answer a simple yes-no question. Should the Biden Justice Department have enforced the criminal law against protesting at a justice's home? Yes or no?
So the rank hypocrisy of Chuck Schumer apologizing the next day and you holding that standard for him and not for your president, who you actually rightfully described when you were running against him in a primary. I would love to run those tapes of how you perfectly talked about the danger of our president and his rhetoric. But now you are failing, in fact, blind to the very things you're accusing Chuck Schumer of. I don't think Donald Trump would know an apology if it hit him in the head. never said apologizing. So again, you are very, very, sir, very, very deep into the waters of hypocrisy in your criticisms of Chuck Schumer.
So let the record reflect that Spartacus did not answer the question and did not tell us whether the criminal law should be enforced, because he knows the answer is yes, and he knows that the Biden Department of Justice was being wildly political and partisan in refusing to enforce the law because they disagreed with the Supreme Court justices' rulings. I have also, in addition to Senator Durbin, who's given his opening statement, I have a written opening statement from Chairman Grassley. Without objection, that written statement is entered into the record, and I will now briefly introduce our distinguished witnesses. We have three. Thank you to each of the witnesses for your testimony. Professor Blackman, prior to 1963, had any federal court issued a nationwide injunction blocking federal law or executive policy?
I'm not aware of any.
Would you agree that from the founding through the 20th century, the federal judiciary consistently understood its powers to be limited to the parties before the court?
Yes.
And would you agree that the widespread use of universal or nationwide injunctions, especially against presidential actions, is a recent development emerging in the last decade?
Yes.
That's important history, because what we're seeing now is not normal, and we have over 2 centuries of history when this didn't happen. It is instead a novel and dangerous concentration of judicial power. When a single district judge issues a nationwide injunction, are they acting as a constitutional judge or as a de facto national policymaker?
It's effectively a veto in the executive branch.
We've seen district judges block President Trump's policies on immigration, energy, birthright citizenship, and even federal hiring and firing, all prior to any appellate review, all without any input from Congress, all from one single judge. Let me offer an analogy. Suppose the federal government approves a plan to cut down trees in a national forest to make way for a pipeline. One person who occasionally camps in that forest files a lawsuit. The judge not only grants relief to that individual, but certifies a putative class action on behalf of all campers nationwide and issues an order blocking any tree cutting in any forest used by any member of the putative class across all 50 states. Professor Blackman, is that consistent with the Constitution's design for judicial relief?
No, it is not.
Or is that rather a recipe for nationwide paralysis based on a single courtroom?
Yes.
Would you also agree that the proper constitutional remedy is to address the plaintiff's actual injury, not to give one judge the power to halt activity unrelated to the case at hand?
Article 3 requires that.
And how does Article 3 require that?
Article 3 speaks of cases and controversies. As specific people have specific injuries. You cannot grant relief to broad classes who don't even assert an injury before the court.
And if broader relief is truly necessary, wouldn't that be better handled by class certification, by the appellate courts, or by Congress, not a lone district judge rewriting national policy?
Absolutely.
Can you explain how this pattern of nationwide relief not only intrudes on the president's Article 2 powers, but also undermines Congress's own lawmaking authority?
What ends up happening is you file many lawsuits in many districts seeking parallel relief, and it only takes one judge to grant the universal injunction. And once the judge grants the injunction, it's off to the races. Unless ruling stayed, the executive branch must immediately halt what it's doing. And this has really changed the way the executive branch and the courts have operated, as you said, over the past decade. And I think this time is ripe to actually address this issue and figure a way to stop this sort of insanity. We can't leave it to the Supreme Court to figure everything out.
And Professor Blackman, your testimony outlines structural reforms that Congress could enact to restore balance. Can you explain how requiring a 3-judge panel drawn from both district and circuit judges would deter judicial overreach and restore legitimacy to preliminary relief?
Well, this is how Congress ran things for much of the 20th century. They stopped in the 60s and 70s. The benefit of a three-judge panel is you have diverse voices. In fact, even on this dais, you don't always agree with each other. But when you talk to each other, you find perhaps the closer truth. A single judge acting by himself or herself can often be like a god. There's no limitation on what they can do. But the benefit is if you have two circuit and one district, you're basically bypassing this next flavor of review. Have the initial panel, 3 judges, and have managed review by the Supreme Court. We need to cut out this race to the Court of Appeals, this race to the Supreme Court. Let's compress the process and get to the result quickly enough so these issues of national significance are resolved fairly.
And by the way, if the characterization of these nationwide injunctions by my Democrat colleagues was accurate, if this was simply a result of, in their view, Trump's repeated lawless activities, one would assume a 3-judge panel would find the same ruling on the merits as a particular lone district judge. Is that correct?
In theory, but if drawn randomly, I think it's less likely. Random draws of 3-judge panels would be a very good change to see how things would work out.
Well, and much like Sherlock Holmes and the lesson he derived from the dog that did not bark, in this case, when we hear our Democrat colleagues talking about this is simply enforcing the law, the dog that isn't barking is why do they keep going to the same handful of radical judges in bright blue districts? And why will every Democrat on this panel oppose any effort to require a 3-judge panel for a nationwide injunction? And the answer is they know fully well that a fair panel would reject the vast majority of these claims. And at the end of the day, I think too many Democrat members of this body want to frustrate the will of the voters who reelected President Trump and elected a Republican Senate and a Republican House, and they're perfectly happy for lone judges to impose their own policy preferences rather than respect the democratic will of the voters. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you.
I now recognize Ranking Member Welch.
Thank you very much. You know, the concrete issues of a universal injunction or forum shopping are things that we can address. But there is a context that we're all operating in, and this is where I disagree with my colleagues, particularly Senator Cruz and his recitation of what he saw as a judicial rampage. This moment we're in our country is testing whether the separation of powers, 3 co-equal branches of government, shall endure. That's really the question. We've seen an abdication of constitutional responsibility by the Congress. It's appalling. Ceding to a president the ability to impound funds, something that was declared unconstitutional in the Nixon Doctrine. Ceding to the president tariff authority, which in the Constitution belongs to the policymakers in Congress. Just 2 examples of Congress ceding its constitutional authority. That's done willingly by my colleagues in the House and some in the Senate. We should reassert our authority. But the second leg of that, the transfer of authority to the executive, is the rampant attack on the judiciary. And Senator Cruz gave some examples of what he thought was judicial overreach. Each one of those examples, as I see it, was the judges doing their job. They disagreed. And when they disagreed, it was asserted by the president and by the attorney general that they were monsters, they were renegades, they were out of control. It was an ad hominem attack because judges were doing their jobs. And I will say we can deal with the forum shopping, which is something the private bar gets involved in. We can deal with universal injunctions. But the all-out assault on judges, because they make decisions, which is the job it is they have to do. And the decision is, has a president exceeded his authority? The decision is, has the Congress passed a law that deviates from constitutional requirements? Those are so profoundly important to keep that separation of powers and to keep the competition between the 3 branches so that we don't have absolute power vested in a single person, and that's the chief executive. So when, Senator Cruz, you talk about a judge making this decision about keeping somebody here, it's called due process. I'm for due process. When we talk about judges striking down under the International trade agreement, whether the president has authority to set these tariffs. And it's a 3-judge decision, one appointed by Trump, one appointed by Obama, one appointed by Reagan, and they say the president didn't have authority. I would say that is the judges doing their jobs. But what is most profoundly important for the well-being of our country is that the Congress reassert its authority to pass laws, to restrict the executive or to empower the executive, but not to cede our authority to the executive ever. And it's our responsibility to do every single thing we can to validate the legitimate exercise of the decision-making authority of the judiciary. I look forward to this hearing and the testimony of the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. I would make 2 brief observations. Number 1, it is interesting as our Democrat colleagues defend these nationwide injunctions that neither of them made any reference to the fact that the number of nationwide injunctions issued in the first 4 months is greater than the entire 20th century and is greater than all of the nationwide injunctions issued against Bush, Obama, and Biden combined, nor did they address the disturbing fact that of the 40 universal injunctions that have been issued in the last 4 months, 35 of them came from the same 5 judicial districts. There is a reason for this. Blue state attorneys general and radical leftist groups are seeking out affirmatively radical judges who they know will impose their own policy preferences. If it were simply, as our Democrat colleagues said, judges following the law, then you wouldn't have to keep going to the same radical judges over and over and over again, because judges across the board should do that. But the litigants know exactly who the zealots are that are on the bench, and that's who they are seeking out. I will also point out that the discussion about the urgency of protecting the safety of judges. Listen, I agree. We should protect the safety of every federal judge, but it is interesting because my Democrat colleagues were utterly silent during 4 years of the Biden administration when you had violent mobs outside the homes of Supreme Court justices unhappy with the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs, and the Biden Justice Department refused to enforce federal law and protect the justices. And my Democrat colleagues were perfectly happy with Supreme Court justices being threatened if they disliked the rulings that were coming from the Supreme Court justices. Unlike my colleagues, I believe we should protect judges regardless of whether I agree with them or not. We should protect their safety. And every time you hear a Democrat senator talk about protecting judges from acts of violence, you ought to ask them, why did they not have a word to say about the Biden Justice Department allowing mobs to threaten the families and children of Supreme Court justices night after night after night while Biden's Attorney General refused to follow the law? And with that, I'll recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
Mr. President.
The senator from Hawaii.
Mr. President, I call up my amendment 2382 and ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Hawaii, Ms. Hirono, proposes for herself and others amendment number 2382 to amendment number 2360.
Mr. President, nearly 90% of K-12 students attend public schools, yet Republicans are pushing a plan in this bill to undermine support for public schools through the first ever nationwide private school voucher program. Republicans claim vouchers are about expanding school choice, but evidence shows these kinds of programs do little to meaningfully increase choice for families, especially low-income families and those who live in rural communities. When it comes down to it, this plan does not help students, it does not promote choice, it does not support public schools. We should be investing in public education for all Americans, not diverting tax dollars to private schools. That's why my amendment with Senator Van Hollen would strip this provision from this bill. Stand up for our nation's students, teachers, and families by rejecting this provision and supporting our amendment. I yield back.
All right, we just watched the whole thing, and I have a lot to say. Start with the DOJ confirmation hearing, because that exchange with Mr. Sauer was frustrating to watch, and not for the reasons Democrats want you to think. Senator Welch kept pushing this hypothetical about whether a president can ignore a Supreme Court order to save the country. Fair question on its face. But Cruz comes in and does what nobody else on that panel had the courage to do. He points out that Joe Biden literally tweeted about defying the Supreme Court on student loans and kept going anyway. That is not a hypothetical. That actually happened. So the selective outrage from the left on presidential lawlessness is honestly breathtaking. Then there is the Aaron Wright situation. Durbin goes after Wrights over old social media posts, including his comments about the Chauvin verdict. Cruz does not let that slide. He reminds the room that Wrights is a Marine reservist and a major, and that the same Democrats clutching their pearls over tweets spent 4 years cheering on a DOJ that was used as a political weapon. The contrast Cruz draws is sharp, and it lands. The nationwide injunctions hearing is where Cruz is at his absolute best. Those numbers are staggering. 37 injunctions against Trump in 2 months. More than the entire 20th century. More than Bush, Obama, and Biden combined. Cruz is not just throwing numbers around either. He has a chart, he has a professor backing the data, and he connects it to a clear pattern of forum shopping where blue state attorneys general deliberately file cases in front of judges they know will rule their way. That is not the judiciary doing its job. That is the judiciary being used as a political firewall against an election result. The 3-judge panel proposal is common sense reform. If Democrats genuinely believe these injunctions are just judges following the law, they should have no problem with a randomly drawn panel of 3 judges reaching the same conclusion. The fact that they oppose even that tells you everything about what this is really about. The Massport subpoena fight was loud, but Cruz holds the line. He is asking basic questions about security incidents at Logan Airport and whether migrants housed there had criminal records. Massport will not hand over documents, and Cruz is right that their refusal raises more questions than it answers. On school choice, Cruz frames it exactly the way it should be framed. Low-income kids are trapped in failing schools, and this tax credit scholarship provision gives them a way out. Democrats vote no because the teachers' unions say no. That's simple. And that shutdown segment at the end. 14 votes to reopen the government. 14 times Republicans voted to pass a clean, continuing resolution. 14 times Democrats blocked it. TSA agents and air traffic controllers are going to work without pay, and a senior Democrat aide reportedly said the shutdown continues until planes fall from the sky. If that does not tell you where their priorities are, nothing will. Cruz today was not performing. Cruz was prosecuting. And the case he made across every single one of these hearings was airtight.